in the continent of Africa, a situation to which they've been brought almost exclusively by direct and indirect human agency. My experience of African wildlife in Africa has been concentrated mainly in West Africa, particularly Nigeria. And in nearly 50 years of more or less incidental observation of vultures, vulture attacks, it's been clear that where resident vulture species were visible throughout northern and central Nigeria, even parts of southern Nigeria, up to the late 1970s, within and outside protected areas, sightings became increasingly rare thereafter. As you will see, I will be showing some photographs, a number of which are scanned slides on a domestic scanner, so apologies for the quality. But here are some photographs then, and you will note in this first picture, which was taken by me in Yankari Game Reserve in northern Nigeria in 1983, numerous vultures of many species on a kill. Here now is a photograph again from Yankari in, again from Yankari in 1991, showing the range of vultures in an area used by vultures for something like social interaction. Again, these are all scanned slides, of course. By the year 2003, in the same area, you will see a single white-headed vulture, and the only vulture we saw on that particular trip. By the early 2000s, then, a few of the larger vultures could be seen in well-protected areas, and hooded vultures were still widely in evidence in protected areas and around urban abattoirs and their local rural equivalents. Today, larger vultures are virtually extinct in northern Nigeria, and hooded vultures are rarely sighted except if particular local conditions apply, such as in the few instances where they are protected for cultural reasons. Back in the early 1980s, Phil Hall, who many of you, of course, will know, on a visit to the Hadejungru wetlands in northeastern Nigeria, came across a dead donkey which had been laced with poison, probably strychnine at the time, and laid out as bait near a small wetland. It was surrounded by 30 to 40 dead vultures of all species, and the logical assumption at the time was that this had been a case of accidental poisoning, and that the bait had in fact been set for hyenas or other farm predators, except that there were no major predators of this class within 100 kilometers of that particular site. Could this then have been a poisoning targeted deliberately at vultures, but seen by my colleague before the perpetrators had in fact had time to collect the victims? If so, what could they possibly gain from dead vultures? Fast forward now to the year 2014. Before starting out on the story of a particular Egyptian vulture and its ill-fated migration to Africa, let me explain how and why this bird ended up with a satellite transmitter. In southern Europe for many years now, populations of Egyptian and other vultures have been collapsing, in part due to the widespread practice by farmers and livestock rearers of setting poison bait, primarily to control foxes and other predators. This is now, of course, universally illegal, but is still practiced and ends up killing some intended targets, but also mainly accidental victims such as buzzards, and of course, vultures, Egyptian and other vultures. As an illustration of this, here are some slides which show a buzzard photographed by me in Cyprus in 1994. We saw this bird fly down to the ground in a farmyard nearby, drove forward to get a view of it, eating what we assumed was a discarded pigeon carcass. It collapsed almost immediately after this last photograph was taken, this one, and was dead by the time we reached it. Yet another victim of lanate, an easily available chemical manufactured by DuPont, sprayed in its dilute form as an insecticide. That's to say, mixed with in about 3 or 4 gallons of water, a small sachet of crystals, but a deadly nerve poison in its crystalline form. Egyptian and other vulture populations have therefore declined dramatically, and environmental organizations such as HOS in Greece and BSPB in Bulgaria, both BirdLife partners in the area, have developed a conservation program to arrest these declines. One element of these programs involves mounting satellite trackers, mainly on juvenile birds, so as to assess survival and pinpoint areas where attrition occurs, be they breeding sites during migration or in the wintering period in Africa. Other elements of these conservation interventions include the establishment of vulture restaurants to divert the birds from possibly poison baits, as well as the introduction of teams with trained dogs to trace baits in breeding areas. Here now are some photographs of Egyptian and griffon vultures with attendant corvids. See, plenty of activity. This was taken in the Rhodope mountain range in southeastern Bulgaria and northern Greece, where both Bulgarian and Greek organizations are active in monitoring and suppressing the use of poison baits set in the region mainly by sheep and goat rearers. Much activity, including sexual in this case, and competition, vulture to vulture and vulture to raven. Ravens were also in the feeding chicks nearby. Continuing now our story of the Egyptian vulture. In 2014, this bird, fitted with a satellite transmitter at its nest site in the Greek Rhodope Mountains, was seen to cease its normal daily movements in southern Niger Republic, and then to proceed slowly along a road leading south across the Nigerian border to end up in a village in northeastern Nigeria. On investigation, it turned out that Paschalis, for that was the name given to the chick by the conservation organization in Greece, had in fact been shot by a Nigerian poacher who, as we learned later, had spent every dry season hunting in wetlands with residual vulture and other raptor and corvid populations in southern Niger. This hunter had transported Paschalis, along with the rest of his dried and smoked carcasses, to his village, where they were sold to a dealer based in a nearby town. It transpired that vulture parts were fetching anything up to $60 a head, to be transported eventually to southern Nigeria, where they were to be sold in specialized quasi-religious fetishist markets. Here is a photograph, as it happens, taken in Kano fetish market in 1957, when I was a schoolboy, I used to ask, showing some birds, mainly hornbills, but no raptors. Then another photograph taken last year in a similar market in southwestern Nigeria, a photo which requires no explanation. $60 is a large sum in those parts, multiplied many times by this hunter's bag. The last time he had been in that particular area of Niger Republic, he admitted to having shot no fewer than 8 Egyptian vultures, as well as 43 other raptors and corvids. The catastrophic decline of African vultures has very recently resulted in the uprating of 4 African vulture species to the IUCN critically endangered category, 2 others to the endangered list, while one vulture, the Egyptian of course, wintering mainly in Africa, remains endangered, a decline which in effect has almost extirpated this important and iconic bird family from vast expanses of the continent. Death has come, of course, by accidental poisoning, in many cases victims of agrochemical pesticides based on carbophora. Also by deliberate poisoning in East Africa, as in East Africa, where apparently poachers set poison baits to kill the vultures which signal their activities to the authorities. Death and breeding failures have also come from loss of habitat and reduction in food availability, resulting from human population expansion, as well as from accidents relating to structures such as power lines. Of the genus Gyps, of course, Indian vultures were almost completely exterminated as a result of accidental poisoning. Here, incidentally, are a few photographs of Egyptian and of an Indian vulture taken in northern India in 2004. Again, pre-digital, as you can see. Science caused the problem by developing diclofenac, a drug, anti-inflammatory drug, but science, with help from BirdLife International and others, supplied the solution by identifying this drug as the culprit. Indian vulture populations are therefore likely to recover eventually. Eurasian species, such as griffon vulture, too, as we have seen, are victims of accidental poisoning in their breeding areas. But measures are being taken to reverse declines with varying degrees of success, as you will hear following our recent experiences in Cyprus. Griffon vultures then, in Cyprus, were in fact reduced to less than 20 birds from thousands by the type of accidental poisoning described earlier. As in Bulgaria and Greece, measures such as the establishment of feeding stations and launching of anti-poisoning campaigns are being taken. Further, a reintroduction program has been organized using griffon vultures brought in from Crete, which in the event seems to have been premature, but anyway, that's another matter. After preparing the text, very recently, news has been received of a major poisoning in Cyprus. 5 birds were found dead, 4 of them of the recently released birds, and the matter is of course being investigated. We're not sure yet what poison was used. But there were indications before this event that the introduced birds were beginning to breed. Here too are photographs of, these are photographs of vultures in Cyprus taken in the period 1994, 2003, then in 2006. As you can see, breeding actively. Right. Then this is a photograph of a black vulture, which occurred sporadically in Cyprus. This was taken in 2002, historically a vagrant, but occasionally breeding, but now in effect extinct. In parallel, raven populations on the island, which are numerous, 40 years ago there were numbers in excess of 1,000, are now reduced to virtual extinction, and the Cyprus imperial eagle, also unfortunately an opportunistic carrion feeder, was last seen in the island in the 1980s. It was probably an indigenous subspecies. One additional chapter must, however, be written in our examination for on the collapse in vulture populations in Africa and Eurasia, but a chapter in this case restricted essentially to the vulture populations of Africa. In what I believe to be the most authoritative analysis of vulture population attrition so far, a recent study built on years of previous research and 5 years of dedicated carcass counting and associated investigation into fetish markets throughout West and Central Africa, which offer vulture and other raptor parts for sale. This paper was published last year in Oryx under the title Trade of Threatened Vultures and Other Raptors for Fetish and Bushmeat in West and Central Africa by Buij, Niklaus, Wittek, Ingram and Ogada. The paper was organized on an unprecedented scale to produce a holistic assessment of the numbers involved in the fetish trade in West and Central Africa as a whole, based on extrapolated carcass data. Now here I've just included a series of vulture photographs taken in northern Nigeria and Cameroon Republic, photographed in 1992, 1999, and 2009. Some of them, as you can see, a scanned slide, but they give an idea. These are all white-backed vultures. This is a hooded vulture. You can see the kind of the numbers that we had up in. This is on the border between Niger and Nigeria in 1999. This is a lappet-faced vultures. So some of these photographs are highlighted. And Ruppel's griffin. Ruppel's griffin. And last, but by no means least, white-headed vulture. I've included also photographs of the forest margin-based palm nut vulture, as its name implies. This is less of a carrion feeder and therefore not as susceptible to poisoning as savanna species, but is nevertheless hunted and traded for fetish markets on the same basis as other vultures, and indeed all large raptors. That's a juvenile, these are all adult birds. The study concluded that in the cases of Ruppel's, hooded, white-backed, white-headed and lappet-faced vultures, numbers traded represented a significant proportion of original populations. To give one example, the extrapolated annual total for the period 2008-2014 of lappet-faced vultures, like all vultures, of course, slow-breeding species, totaled between 5 and 7% of the circa 3,000 estimated West Africa Sahara-based and Sahara-based population. Extending this rate of attrition back to the early 1980s, when we had what we concluded to be direct evidence of a deliberate poisoning event in northeastern Nigeria, possibly to supply an entrenched fetish market in southern Nigeria. A simple calculation explains to us how vulture populations in Nigeria collapsed to the point where the large savanna vultures are now, in effect, extinct in these areas. Fetish markets in Nigeria, therefore, have to be supplied today from neighboring countries, such as first Benin Republic, then other countries in West and Central Africa. Although I was happy to note from a recent paper, a very recent paper, that hooded vulture populations in Senegambia remain more or less stable, have remained over the past 10 years more or less stable, possibly because of their relative distance from the main markets, and also because hooded vultures, in any event, depend substantially on human-generated waste, provided, of course, that it's not cleaned up, and provided also that that the bird has not been poisoned in the process. It would not surprise me if the rising incidence of deliberate vulture poisoning in southern and eastern Africa were not in part linked to the very considerable West African expatriate communities in these countries and the infusion of resulting cultural influences. Even in the case of South Africa, markets for vulture parts have now developed to the point where sales can, to a certain extent, be measured. For example, it was noted that during the Football World Cup in 2010, sales in South Africa spiked because a substantial number of believers thought that consumption of vulture and other raptor heads could give them second sight into the future so they could predict winners and losers. I think when it comes back, it will come back. I was warned that this might happen. Right, so same position. Very correct. Right. As human population increased, and the supply, sorry, I've gone too far, and the supply of and the supply of vulture and other raptors decrease, economic theory tells us that prices and business opportunities multiply, with the results reflected in the figures adduced in the study that I referred to earlier. According to these estimates, rates of decline in vulture populations of the following species over three generations are the Egyptian vulture, Egyptian vulture, 92%, African white-backed vulture, minus 90%, Ruppel's griffin, 97%, Cape vulture, which is more or less stable, but still went down 90%. Hooded vulture, 83%. Leopard's face vulture, 80%. White-headed vulture, 96%. Of these Egyptian vultures, most of which breed outside Africa, as we have seen, are victims also of poisoning in their breeding areas, but this is largely accidental, as is the rate of loss due to problems encountered during migration. All 7 remaining species are virtually exclusive to Africa, and it is a prime responsibility of Africa-based organizations and peoples to reverse this collapse. It's clear that in cultural and public awareness terms at least, conservation efforts need to be focused on West Africa, in particular Nigeria and Benin Republic, as well as on associated diaspora in Africa as a whole. What can be done now and in the future to save vultures there? As noted, the longer-term approach has to be in to change cultural beliefs and behaviors. These need to be clearly understood so that re-education and public awareness can be applied in the first instance within appropriate sections of West African communities. It would probably make sense to approach this through the major monotheistic religions, which in Africa is to say Islam, of course, and Christianity, but more particularly Islam, because most of the poisoning, hunting and trading activity feeding this market is located in predominantly Islamic areas. There is clearly an opportunity to do this, as beliefs underlying the fetish trade are in direct conflict with tenets both of Islam and of Christianity. Action, however, is needed in the more immediate term. Governments must be persuaded to take measures such as banning open sale of carbofuran-based pesticides, or at least their sale in crystal form, to eliminate or at least to restrict the fetish trade in larger parts. Now, however, the first priority must involve an intercession with governmental and local authorities in countries where vulture populations are still substantial and being poached to supply this trade in West Africa and elsewhere. The objective has to be enforcement of what are almost universally existing laws banning trade, killing and trade in all vulture parts. In all vulture parts. That these laws predate recent UN-linked initiatives and relate to the role of vultures in controlling disease and waste disposal. Almost invariably, such laws are still on statute books